Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, with James suddenly unreachable and gone for days without a single message, Diep is left to manage her entire grapefruit orchard on her own. What begins as simple worry quickly spirals into real fear, until a phone call from James's mother brings her a fragile sense of hope. But the challenges don't stop there. Without her partner by her side, Diep faces tough negotiations, slow retail days, ruthless market competition, and a heartbreaking business loss of $10,000. Stay until the end, because this episode isn't just about loss. It's about endurance, hope, and the quiet power of a woman fighting for her future. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us. Late afternoon, shadows stretch long across the orchard as Diep sits alone at the wooden table beside her tiny office, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. For the fifth time today, she dials James's number, hoping, praying for a different outcome. But once again, the automated voice cuts through the silence. The subscriber is currently unavailable. Her fingers tremble. Her heart sinks. And the loneliness she's been trying to ignore finally spills into the open. It has been days without a single message from James. No calls. No updates. Nothing. The distance between them, once softened by his constant presence, now feels like a canyon swallowing her whole. She tries again. The same message echoes. Diep bites her lip, forcing down fear. Is he sick? Is he hurt? Why hasn't he called? Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, she dials a different number. Ms. Huyen. James's mother picks up almost immediately, her warm, familiar voice bringing the smallest hint of comfort. Diep, is everything okay, dear? Diep swallows hard. Ma'am, I haven't been able to reach James for days. I'm really worried. There's a soft chuckle on the other end, gentle in a way only a mother could manage. Oh, sweetheart, don't worry too much. James is on a business trip, quite far away. The signal there is terrible, and you know him. Once he's with his old friends, he forgets everything else. He'll be back in a few days. Relief washes through Diep, warm and soothing like sunlight after storm clouds. But deep down, a faint unease remains, a tiny knot refusing to untangle. He's okay then? He's fine, Ms. Huyen reassures. Just busy. Focus on your work. And if you have any trouble, anything at all, you call me immediately, all right? Diep closes her eyes, grateful for the kindness. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The call ends, leaving Diep alone with thoughts that shift slowly from suffocating anxiety to fragile hope. She sits by the window, watching the sun dip behind the grapefruit trees planted by her parents long ago. Regret flickers. Regret that James isn't here. Regret that she let worry overwhelm her. But as the breeze rustles through the leaves, she feels something stir inside her. Not confidence exactly, but determination. Tomorrow, she tells herself, she'll work harder. She has to. Because this orchard, their future, her livelihood, it won't run itself. The next morning arrives wrapped in golden light. The orchard glimmers with ripe fruit, dew clinging to every leaf. Diep guides a wholesale buyer through the rows. An experienced businesswoman, dressed in crisp white, clipboard in hand, gaze sharp, like someone who has inspected dozens of orchards just this week. But Diep knows her own land like the palm of her hand. Every tree planted by her parents, every root nurtured, every branch shaped by years of storms and sunshine. These first rows here are cinnamon grapefruit, Diep explains. The next are green-skinned. Over there, you'll find the sugar and sour varieties. The buyer picks a fruit, slices it open, tastes. Her expression softens with approval. Flavor's good, better than the batches I saw last week. Transport will be easy, Diep adds quickly. The road's flat, trucks can access all the way to the gate. But your price, the woman says, raising an eyebrow. It's higher than others quoting me. Diep stands firm. Because the quality is higher. These trees are well cared for. Last year, we earned $130 million from the cinnamon section alone. This year, after calculating market dips, I've lowered it to $90 million. That's already a significant cut. The woman flips through her notes. How many fruits per tree? Average 20 to 30. Some even reach 45. They walk beneath the thick canopy of green-skinned grapefruit. The buyer tastes again and nods. This variety will sell well near Tet. Diep senses a breakthrough. She keeps her tone steady. If you take both sections, I'll help with the transport crew. The buyer stops, breathes deeply, calculates in her mind. Then she finally says, "All right, let's do it. I'll deposit $30 million first." The moment the bills exchange hands, Diep's legs feel weak with relief. She fights the urge to breathe out too loudly, keeping her composure until the buyer leaves through the orchard gate. Only then does she sit under the shade of a grapefruit tree, pulling out her notebook. She begins calculating everything. 90 million revenue from the cinnamon section, minus labor, minus picking, minus transport, minus packaging. And numbers don't lie. There's a tight squeeze. She might even lose money this year. Diep presses her hand to her forehead. "I think too much," she whispers to herself. But saying it doesn't ease the pressure. The orchard is beautiful, lush, sunlit, thriving. Yet her profit margins shrink like soil cracking in drought. Standing up again, she forces herself back to work. If wholesale can't save her, maybe retail will. Maybe small sales, day by day, will keep her afloat until James returns, until life feels steady again. As dusk settles, Diep picks up little Nye from school. The child's face lights up the moment she sees Diep, running into her arms with the kind of joy that melts exhaustion instantly. Together, they return to the small grapefruit stall in front of the house. Diep slices open a fruit, handing Nye 2 bright, juicy wedges. "Today, you get 2 slices because you've been so good," Diep smiles. Nye beams, peeling one herself with clumsy determination. "Can I do it? By myself?" Diep nods. "Of course." A customer approaches. 2 kilos, please." Diep weighs the fruit. 30,000. The exchange is simple, but the warm glow from the hanging lamp turns the scene into something gentle, something comforting. Nye munches happily. "Auntie Diep, this grapefruit is so sweet." Diep laughs softly. "You make everything sweeter." And in that small moment, surrounded by ripening fruit, soft lamplight, and the sound of a child's delight, Diep feels something loosen inside her chest. The exhaustion fades. The pressure quiets. James isn't here. The business is strained. The orchard is struggling. But this little girl's smile, It keeps Diep standing, keeps her fighting, keeps her believing that tomorrow will be brighter. Because even in the middle of loss, even in the middle of loneliness, family moments like this are the sweetness she needs to go on. Night settles over the orchard like a soft blanket, but Diep can't sleep. She sits at the small wooden desk in her room. Papers spread everywhere. Sales records, cost breakdowns, last year's earnings, this year's struggles. A single lamp flickers above her, its warm circle of light barely strong enough to soften the shadows creeping along the walls. For the first time since her parents passed, she feels truly alone. She flips through the ledger again. Loss, $10,000. The number stares back at her, sharp as a knife. 10,000. Not a small miscalculation. Not a temporary dip. A real loss, substantial enough to shake the foundation of her small business. Without James, she has no one to ask for advice. No one to help carry the burden. No one to stand beside her in the orchard and say, "Don't worry, Diep. We'll fix this." She feels the weight of that absence in every breath. If he were here, he would have already taken the calculator from her hands. He would have already made her laugh, already told her to rest. But the house is quiet, and the only sound is the rustling of paper and her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She closes the book, leans back, and let the worry pour over her like water from a cracked jar. How am I supposed to handle this alone? The orchard, with its hundreds of trees her parents devoted their whole lives to, now depends entirely on her decisions. And losing $10,000 means something is slipping out of control. In the morning, she forces herself up before dawn. She ties her hair back, grabs the broom, and sweeps the front yard. The rhythm of sweeping steadies her breath. Every stroke of the broom seems to whisper, "Keep going, keep going." She brews a pot of tea, sips it slowly, and tells herself the same thing. Then she returns to the orchard for another long day. Around mid-morning, 2 local traders stop by. Their friendly faces, women from the nearby market, but their expressions today are harder than usual. "We heard prices dropped," one says. "Can you lower yours?" Diep forces a smile. "Sisters, the quality here is different, but I can reduce a little for you." They glance at each other. "We'll think about it. If others offer cheaper, we'll go there first." "Of course." Diep nods, though disappointment sinks deep. They leave, and once again, the orchard feels too big, too quiet, too heavy for one person to manage. By noon, Diep has cut fruit, packed small bags, served a handful of customers, and made just enough to cover lunch. She rests under a tree, letting the sun warm her back, wondering if the buyers will return. But they don't. The whole afternoon passes with barely any movement. The gentle breeze stirs the leaves above her head, but it does nothing to stir her sails. She checks her phone several times. Still nothing from James. No missed calls, no messages. Even Ms. Huyen's reassurance can't quiet the loneliness creeping into her chest. At dusk, she decides to push through the evening shift. The night market usually brings more customers, and she needs the extra income. She gathers a basket of the best green-skinned grapefruits, wipes them clean, and heads out. The night market is alive with voices, lanterns, sizzling food, and laughter. But her small stall sits at the edge, overshadowed by bigger vendors, brighter lights, louder calls. She sets up her board, arranges the fruit neatly, and calls out gently, "Fresh grapefruit, sweet and juicy, come try a slice." A few people sample, a few buy, but most walk past, bargaining at other stalls where prices are lower, even if the quality is not. At one point, a man takes a sample, nods approvingly, but then says, "Too expensive, lower it by 10,000. Diep shakes her head with polite firmness. "I can reduce 5. No more." He walks away without another word. By the time the market winds down, she has sold enough to earn a little, but nowhere near enough to ease her worries. She heads home under the dim street lights, each step heavier than the last. The orchard glows faintly in the moonlight as she approaches, the trees standing tall, loyal, unchanging. Yet Diep feels like she is the one weathering a storm. When she reaches her yard, she finds Nye waiting on the porch, swinging her legs, holding a small container of leftover rice the neighbor gave her. "Auntie Diep, you're home." Nye runs up, wrapping her arms around Diep's waist. Diep hugs the child back, burying her face in her soft hair. "Were you waiting long?" "No. I ate with Grandma next door. They told me to bring this for you." The warmth of that simple gesture almost breaks her. "Thank you, Nye." Inside, the house is dark except for the kitchen lamp. Diep washes her hands, warms the food, and eats quietly while Nye chats about her day at school. How she drew a tree, how she helped her friend tie shoelaces, how she dreamed of picking grapefruits as big as her head. Diep listens closely, answering gently. And with every word Nye says, the weight in her heart softens just a little. After dinner, Diep tucks Nye into bed. The child clutches her pillow, eyes already sleepy. "Auntie Diep?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why do you look sad?" Diep brushes a hand over her hair. "A little tired, but don't worry, I'll be okay." Nye nods lightly. "When James comes back, he will help you." Diep's chest tightens, but she forces a smile. "Yes, when he comes back." After putting Nye to sleep, she steps outside again. The orchard stretches out quietly before her, illuminated by moonlight. She walks slowly between the rows, touching the branches one by one. "These fruits will carry me," she whispers. "I just need to get through this season." But no matter how she tries to reassure herself, the truth remains. She is losing money. She is losing time. And without James, she feels like she is losing direction. The night breeze rustles the leaves gently, as if responding to her sorrow. She stands there for a long moment, gazing at the orchard her parents left behind. Their legacy, her responsibility, and now her biggest struggle. She knows she can't fall apart. She knows she must endure. But the realization that she has lost $10,000 without James by her side cuts deeper each time she thinks about it. Still, as she heads back inside, she hears Nye's soft breathing through the open door. And it reminds her, she isn't completely alone. She still has someone who needs her, someone who trusts her, someone who loves her without conditions. Tomorrow, she will rise again. Tomorrow, she will fight again. Tomorrow, she will find a way to recover that $10,000. Because that's what Diep does. She keeps going, even when it hurts.